Right. Well, welcome everyone to our Authors podcast for the article that Eugene and Cindy wrote about their experiences in UC Links and how they moved from one educational paradigm to another. So let's start with introducing ourselves. And first on my screen is Eugene. So Eugene, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, at least for me, morning, good afternoon, good evening for someone. I don't know, Tara, it's probably evening there. Is it evening for you?
Yeah, it's almost 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Almost, yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us and discussing this our paper. I want to apologize in advance that Cindy couldn't come because she has some conflict, but she sends big hello to her. And my name is Eugene Matusov, and I'm currently at the University of Delaware, but before that, long time ago, I was at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where the whole wonderful experience started for me, my journey. And that's basically it. We can discuss why it took like 20 years to publish that paper, and we can discuss that part of the whole enterprise. So should I continue just passing that, or
yes,
Anna, do you want
please.
to next?
Okay, so I will just Okay, I will just introduce myself quickly. I'm Anna Marjanović-Shane, and I'm a Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Dialogic Pedagogy Journal. I'm very engaged in the research in dialogic pedagogy and democratic education at the moment, but also my old and ever loves are children's play, drama in education, and the various forms of creative thinking and talking. So this is about me, and I'm passing this now to Charles. He's the next one on my screen.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Charles Underwood. I'm from UC Berkeley, and I have been the executive director for UC Links for a number of years, and that's how I came to know Gene and Cindy, and so it's really great to see their article after all these years, and so I'm looking forward to a great discussion of your article.
Okay, so next on my screen, thank you very much, Charles. Next on my screen is Tara. Please, Tara, introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Tara from India. My interest in dialogic pedagogy is to explore this notion of ontological engagement with the students, much more to humanize them more than anything. Otherwise, they are kind of we anonymize them in class by this kind of a monologue, teacher monologue. And so I thought to bring back that identity of each child, and then to humanize teaching-learning relationship, this notion of ontological engagement, following students' interest and their orientation, that I thought was very important to bring out their voice and to follow, instead of straitjacketing them to the curriculum and the teacher's plan, to allow them to be free and spontaneous, and then to understand where they're going, and then to use those as teaching moments and help them to go further. This is my concern.
Thank you very much, Tara. Next on my screen is Richard. So,
I am Rick Beach, retired, taught at the University of Minnesota for many years, and have fond memories of Eugene at the old AERA activity theory sessions. I do a lot of work on the topic of languaging, which is the notion that language is action, language is doing. It's not a system, it's a medium by which people enact relations. And if you want more on that, the link is languagingpbworks.com. Also, because I'm happily retired, spend my winters in Berkeley. So yeah, nice warm weather in Berkeley in the winter. So that's me, Rick Beach.
Thank you very much, Rick. And next on my screen is Mara.
Hi, I'm Mara Mahmood, and I get to work with Charles and all the other wonderful folks, part of the UC Links network. I'm the Associate Director of UC Links. Eugene and I think, passed each other like ships in the night. When he was coming to Santa Cruz, I was leaving Santa Cruz, and I've been working with the UC Links network. I similarly was teaching the undergraduate class and setting up after-school programs along with students and graduate students and teachers and administrators at local schools. And now I work in the statewide office with Charles and get to work with the programs all over California and the nation and the world, and great people such as Carla, who are doing the work on the ground. And one question I'm interested in, Charles and I are working on a book with Olga right now on kind of exploring UC Links through university community engagement. And one of the things I'm thinking about is how does that concept of the critical dialogue in action, it's clear how that works out and plays out with the teachers and students, but also wanted to think about what that might look like in partnerships, collaboration with partnerships, and that critical dialogue in action with, say, your community partners between the university and community. So thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, that's very exciting. Okay, next on my screen is Carla. Please introduce yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my name is Carla Trujillo, and I work for a foundation that has a connection with UC Links. I met Mara and Charles through Olga Vasquez. My job is to be the student at large and to do art and guide the little ones through this crazy pandemic. I've been currently accepted to Berkeley, so I will be attending UC Berkeley for the next 2 years. Thank goodness, finally. Yeah. And I do everything. I'm a one-person team, so very, very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Carla. And next on my screen is Natalia.
Good evening. I'm Natalia Shikhmina. I'm a senior lecturer in Ukrainian University, South Ukrainian National Pedagogical University, after Ushinsky in Odessa. I'm sorry, but this is my first experience in this meeting, and my first experience in meeting with scientists from another country, because I'm usually meeting and speaking only Russian or Ukrainian scientists, because it's now it's very, very interesting, and I hope it's very important for my future job. My interest is dialogic pedagogic in art education, especially in music education. And I'm a piano teacher. I teach students to play piano. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and I hope your first experience will prove to be very good experience. If you have any issues with people talking maybe too fast, don't hesitate to ask that you didn't understand something. This is very normal. Many of us are here other language speakers, but
thank you. I'm understand.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, but not the least, it's Bonki Son.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is my first time joining as well, so I'm very excited and honored. I am a postdoctoral fellow under Dr. Angel Lin, CRC researcher at Simon Fraser University in Canada, BC. I am currently working with her about co-designing and co-developing a critical content and language integrated learning approach in higher ed, especially students who are joining at the university as a first year or pre-university students, focusing on international students. And I am still very new with dialogical approach to pedagogy, but I'm very interested in learning more. And that's the reason I'm joining here today and very looking forward to hear more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. So let's now give word to Eugene as our author, and I'm sorry also that Cindy is not here. So I envision this interview as semi-formal. I'll ask a few questions, and maybe anybody who has more questions or comments or suggestions are welcome to share. Do you agree with that, Eugene? Okay. All right. So Eugene, please, can you first tell us a little bit more about this project, like the introduction into the whole thing? How did you come up to write this project as writing this article? And of course.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm not planning to talk more a lot because I think things are written in articles. So I would like to hear more people commenting, asking questions, expressing concern, disagreements, and so on and so forth. But to be brief, just an interesting story of this paper that took us, 23 years in working, maybe, 23, I think. When we started in 97, and it was, let me start the whole thing. I was almost like thrown in the project because I was a postdoc at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and before I did my PhD there. And I decided to stay after I got my postdoc grant, and I decided to continue staying in Santa Cruz. Actually, the work was, the postdoc grant was about studying collaboration in education, like in broader sense. And then I was approached, I think, in summer, and I forgot by who, I think about Barbara Rogov, who was my collaborator, advisor, and also co-worker on this postdoc grant. And she asked me if I'm interested in teaching a course with something that's called UC Links and Fifth Dimension. And I had very vague idea what it is about. I've heard about Michael Cole project before, but I didn't know details. And so I don't know what's actually happened, and maybe Charles know and Mara more what's happened before that, and why I was approached, like why other people couldn't do it or whatever. But I was approached by Barbara saying that there are courses there in September, and there is nobody to teach that, and do you want to teach that? And I was thinking, wow, why not? Although I should be committed completely to do research, and to some degree it might be even a violation of my terms to do postdoc. I don't remember exactly details of that, but I was eager to jump on that for many different reasons. One thing, I want to know more about Fifth Dimension, and I've heard a lot from Michael Cole about that, but one thing is hearing about that, another trying that. And the whole project sounds for me very interesting, although immediately I started developing a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I didn't visit any sites before that, and my understanding that some other colleagues from University of California, Santa Cruz visited sites, but it was before me, probably in spring 96. And so I didn't go there. I've heard some stories, which is interesting, and sometimes conflicting stories about that, but I didn't see myself that, unfortunately. And so I had initially, Cindy was not there. I don't remember Cindy much communication, or maybe I forgot about that. But I was teaching that class with 2 TAs, and mostly my communication was initially with them about like whole thing. I asked Barbara, but Barbara told me that she doesn't know much about that either. So it's, and I had some communication with Michael Cole trying to understand the project. So the project started, and we didn't do exactly what we were, what we thought we were expected to do, which is fifth dimension. We call it bastardized version of fifth dimension because we couldn't understand many ideas or disagreed with them. Maybe we could understand, but we disagreed with them, like about this wizard. There's supposed to be wizard at the side. The whole project was involved undergraduate students going to the after-school program. In this case, it was Barrios Unidos at in Santa Cruz. For people who know that place, they know it's a kind of wonderful place there. Not very big, but it's kind of from outside. It's not big, but when you get there, it feels kind of a lot. It's a little bit nice in itself, in that building. And I didn't choose that site. Somebody, by the way, by now I start thinking even who chose that place, but it was well chosen from my point of view. Thank you to whoever that person is. So, so the idea they coming there, I think twice a week back then, and for each of them. But the Barrios Unidos were open for us, I think 4 days a week, or maybe 5. So each student will come for twice a week for I think hour and a half. And after that, the students, we had debriefing at the center, I believe, just discussing like what's happened. And then also in the class, we have a web. I was very proud. This is the first web I built. It was based on front page, the Microsoft front page, when the students could discuss things about the class. They write field notes about that, what's happened, although it becomes rather loose. It was not like field notes. It was more embedded in the discourse about what's going on. But we didn't have structure, fifth dimension structure that Michael Cole described. We didn't have so-called wizard. We didn't have wizard assistant. We didn't have maze. We didn't have task cards because I thought, and my colleagues at Santa Cruz, like my TAs and then Cindy joined us, we thought that it's kind of unnecessary constraints and creates potentially conflicts, which later we found that our suspicions were correct because Honorin, another colleague from the UC Links, studied that, and she kind of found that there is a lot of this kind of constraints generate a lot of conflicts, and we thought it's unnecessary, absolutely. So we started that. There was huge number of the problems, some of them technical problems. Computers didn't work at all. For the first time, I connected them in network, trying to make them work, spending a huge amount of time just fixing that. And then the whole interesting things working with the students started. So this is, and we described that in our paper with Cindy. Cindy joined like really heavily later, I think in the next quarter, in the winter quarter. She was, we were co-teaching a class on language, which I don't remember how we negotiated that co-teaching, because the class was focused on language, and Cindy was a specialist, not me in that. But somehow she tolerated me to be her partner in crimes. We had, that's in itself such an interesting experience of our co-teaching, because we were not, at times we were completely incompatible with each other, but it was fun, at least from my point of view. We didn't become enemies after that, let me put it that way. We actually developed much stronger friendship. And so we went through a lot of things, but that's another story. In terms of this paper, I think in the spring '97, and maybe my memory is wrong, maybe it was '98, but I think it's '97. Mike Hall contacted I think, and Charles and Mara maybe have better memory and better understanding of that. Contacted people who work in different UC Links sites, asking to contribute a chapter for upcoming book. For some reason, either this book never happened or it's happened in different format because Marie Duane, I think I saw that there is some book came out, but it's very different book than originally I think was planned.
Gene, I can tell you the history of that book, which kind of fell through the cracks, but that's another topic. But the truth is that it did fall through the cracks and was never published.
Yeah, but we didn't know about that. We keep working on the chapter, and we actually like looking back from on this chapter, it became clear that it was two chapters, not very. I mean, it's not that they're not compatible, but that it's just two different chapters were there. And one chapter it was about maybe even three chapters. There was like different issues there, and they only connected. It's because we were at the same sites in the same kind of project. But one issue was roles of the students at the center. Another one, teasing, and I think Cindy and some other participants like Pablo Chavahai and I think some others. They wrote a different papers on that. This chapter that we published right now with Cindy, the reason why it was takes so long to do that, part of that was because we, looking again back, we struggle with conceptualization. We didn't know that we're actually moving away from the notion of collaboration, and we're constantly trying to discuss what's happening from collaborative framework until almost like rather recently we realized, wow, actually it was anti-collaboration to some degree. It was moving away from collaboration rather than one kind of a form of collaboration. And we had this notion very early about critical dialoguing, but we thought it's rather compatible with the notion of collaboration. And we thought, wow, the whole story is actually of our divorcing from that, but it took us so long time before we realized what was going on. And actually, Anna was on this team. When we published in the journal, we tried to mask my identity because it was not a good conflict of interest. And so my colleagues didn't know that it's me. I tried to actually mask behind even a woman to push away from that. But the reason I'm mentioning that, it's because we really struggled. If you see the draft that submitted to the journal, it was a very confusing draft, still confusing draft.
Yes.
And fortunately, I'm really thankful, and Cindy is also thankful to reviewers of the journal and managing editors who really, I wouldn't like this word pushed us, but makes evident our struggle to ourselves and help us to move forward in that struggle. And
I was one of these managing editors, and when I first got the draft, first of all, I had a gut feeling that it was Eugene because of the language, because of all kinds of issues that we discussed so many times. But he says, no, I don't know this person. So a couple of times I tried again, and he was very adamant that it was not him. So I then just kind of like focused on the issues, and they tried to dig deeper, it's not pushing, but really, can you explain that? And can you explain that? And it was good.
So now I think we are open for your comments, questions, observations, reflections, critique. And so I really appreciate you guys coming here and discussing that paper with me. And I'm pretty sure that Cindy will be very much interested in watching that our discussion. Thank you.
So let me start with my questions for you, Eugene. Could you tell us more about really what were your concretely, what were the tensions that you experienced at the time, and how do you look at them now, like through the examples?
Yes. Well, first of all, again, I was very much working with Barbara Rogov, and for those of you who don't know who is Barbara Rogov, is and was she one of the leading sociocultural theoretician and psychologist, developmental psychologist, who really pushed forward this notion of collaboration. And when I was fortunate enough when I was in Santa Cruz and before that in University of Utah, where she was developing this notion. So you find me as a collaborator of some of her papers were developing in collaboration in general and collaboration in education in specific. One thing that we developed, a very famous paper that we wrote together, famous like for me. It's about three models in education, and one model that trying to capture that conventional education that's called adult run, and which is very predominant based on the scaffolding, and which the idea that everything is controlled by the adult. In school it's teacher. By the way, the terminology coming from psychology, not from education. If Barbara Rogov were educationalist, it would have probably called not adult run but teacher run. But since she was studying parents and many other contexts, that's why it becomes a rather broad sense of this approach. Because it's not prevalent only in schooling, but also in parenting and in some other institutions but on the other hand, adult run is probably also too narrow, because this approach can work with adults in adult education and not in infant education at all. So it's adult run when someone who is considered to be more knowledgeable, more experienced, more powerful, sets the whole goals and provides all the steps for achieving these goals for the students or children or whoever. The second approach that we kind of developed was called child run approach, with idea that adult or teacher stays away from the students or children and try not to contaminate them, and just waiting when they ask for help. If students or children didn't ask for help, help will be not provided, and the help will be exactly what was asked, no more, no less. So this is what considered the children run. And then collaborative approach, which was the idea is that both student and teacher collaborates together on in the activity and in the guidance. So they kind of keep working together on achieving common goal. Let me tell you that I had problems with this kind of notions before, and I discussed it with Barbara and with other people. And the reason is that my background also, like Barbara's, in developmental psychology, but also kind of sociocultural, with sociocultural flavor, or maybe reverse, within the sociocultural approach. And there is suspicion that this kind of model has ethnocentric bias. And by ethnocentric means our bias, which is Barbara, Eugene, and other group, because we bias towards collaboration. And Barbara was aware about that, and I think she's still aware of that, and I think she struggles with that, like we struggled with that. But that was one of the, I would say, seed that grew up in me back then. Very conceptual. We discussed it a lot about this ethnocentric bias, because we're really trying to say that collaboration is better than adult run and children run. But from kind of cultural perspective, we felt, well, anthropological perspective, which is very much, again, if you read Barbara, her wonderful book about cultural development, you see that we really deeply socialized in this problem. And there was tension in this framework that we developed. So when I start teaching, that become even more evident. Like, what's the purpose of the teaching this class? Like, from our framework, purpose was obvious, to kind of socialize our students in collaborative approach. But basically, deeply down, how it's different from adultery on the meta level. We have our truth that we're imposing on our students. Yes, we can do it through collaboration. What if they don't want to collaborate? What they have different ideas? So all of these questions start torturing me immediately. Like before, it's one thing to think about that kind of in abstract way when you're doing research, and another thing, you're completely thrown into that. So what's interesting is we shared a lot of literature, we meaning not royal we, but my teaching assistant and me. At that time, I designed classes more or less traditional way, which is there was readings there, pre-designed, and I provide a lot of sociocultural readings. And that sociocultural readings involved these tensions about focusing on how great, glorifying collaboration, as well as a lot of sociocultural critique of ethnocentrism, and which I think reverberate in the students as well, one way or another. So we had tensions very quickly start developing among students as well. We had this more or less 3 groups of the students, maybe more than 3. Definitely we had big chunk of the students who very much were strong about like soil, who is, by the way, I try to watch my language very careful because it's pseudonyms and I don't want to reveal real name, because that you can ask me what's happened with soil. I know what's happened with him, and Lisbeth can talked about that. And they were very strong in criticizing whole project because it's not good educational enough. We had students who more or less can be called children, who really thought that that their goal is to support kind of not just support, just to be there and be playful partners of the children, and that's it. By the way, the level of debates within our class, let me tell you that we had derogatory terms that students applied to each other. Like, for example, the second groups were accused to be glorified babysitters. That's just the terms that were used with students to discuss that. We had very tense discussion. I love that class. We had students who really, I think, especially reading our literature, our articles, really espoused towards collaborative approach. We had students in between who were not sure. And they might gravitate to one group, but not completely. They were flavor of the students who were disoriented, I would say, and didn't know like what's going on. And there are a lot of demands to clarify what I want the students to do, which I try to avoid by saying, well, let's experiment, let's like try your ideas, what you should do, and discuss that. And basically, half honestly, half not honestly, thinking back of that, I say, I don't know what I want. Why is it was half honestly? Because at the same time, I wanted them to develop collaborative approach, and that was not honest from me to say that. On another hand, I doubt that it was a good goal. In this case, I honestly didn't know what the goal was. And so I was struggling myself. So when whole events, this emerge with soil, and it become a very, I personally immediately realized that it's an important event. It took maybe 20-something years to realize how it's important, why is it so important. but it was very important in realizing that there is some, this event really defining the program. And because Searle, as you know, from read this article, he came to me, and I think I was with some other TAs at the time, and just demanded that I constrain kids and other students to make this environment more educational. And he did it because he tried to do it himself, but it was kids were very much resistant to that, and other students resisted as well. Some collaborated with him and some resisted, and it drove him crazy. They were running away from his, he tried to create pre-test, post-test, like doing a very good adult right scaffolding educational model approach to test kids first about their skills in math and language and so on and so forth, develop instruction, which is he called intervention, and then test how much it was successful or not successful. The problem is that when the kids were initially very open to that because, wow, it's something interesting going on, but then they realize it's kind of schoolish stuff that they're sick and tired in school, and there's so many interesting games around, so interesting people, so this just physically ran away from him, and it made him very upset. So he came to asking, like, basically demanding us to kind of force on kids and other students to cooperate and maybe even collaborate. So the whole event started from that. Maybe I should stop, and if you have any questions.
Anybody else with your questions, comments, or just if you would like to add something?
Yeah, Eugene, I have a question. You said that you weren't sure about the goals. And I'm thinking here about Engstrom's notion of expansive learning and his theory that objective or goals are always often open-ended in activity, that you never know what you might achieve, or you keep revising your goals. And I'm wondering, in that site or space, were the goals constantly being redefined, or you weren't sure about what the goals were in terms of the notion of expansive learning, that we never totally achieve our goals?
Yeah, the thing is, what I start suspecting, again, it was more, I'm trying to be honest, but it's difficult, 23 years passed since then, how much my thinking right now influenced my thinking back then. But I start suspecting there that education is not about goals. So it's not only what goals it should be, and should it be open, but maybe there should be no goals. And this is what start touching me. By the way, if you ask me what it's coming from reading Bakhtin. And I was versed in Bakhtin long before that. And Bakhtin was constantly living in me, and a struggle with activity theory, with Vygotsky. And I knew for a long time that they're incompatible with each other. And I was much more attracted to Bakhtin, but I didn't know what to do with that for many different reasons. One reason that Bakhtin was, as many of you know, working in a literary kind of scholarship and not close to education, or even psychology. And so it took me a while to figure out that the notion of dialogue, for example, it's not activity-based. And again, it took me a while, but I felt that tension back then. And I struggled. It's not only what kind of goal, but should it be goal? Should education be goal-driven at all? That's a big question that was hanging over me.
In a way, I want to kind of like just piggyback on that is that whenever you have a defined goal, even if it's not defined fully and it's open, you somehow presetting what you're going to do in some way. And education very often happens as in the moment when you least expect that you will actually even learn anything. And that's one, on one hand. On the other hand, it's that really the notion of critical dialogue in action is based on deconstruction. And deconstruction is anti-goal. It's really construction in various creative activities like drama or play, where you have to share something in order to make something together. You can, like in improv, they say, you have to always say yes and collaborate in order to be able to build upon others. It's opposite of critical dialogue, where you are deconstructing and destroying in many different things. Maybe you're also opening space for construction, of course, but the main predominant activity is deconstruction.
It's about, thanks, Anna. It's about like making life more difficult, not easier. And that's why it's anti-goal. And that's why actually when students ask, so what do you want us to do? Or what do you want to achieve in this class? And again, honestly, I was saying that I don't know, and it was very good answer. Now I understand. Back then, I thought it's not good answer. It's like shows that I'm just not a good teacher or novice teacher, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there was some attraction for me to say I don't know, and the more I try to shake this idea that I know or I should know what's the purpose of education, the more I was kind of start feeling liberating from that. So when I criticize collaboration, I kind of criticize two types of collaboration, and I a little bit discussed that in the paper, or we discussed that in the paper with Cindy. It's kind of close collaboration when it's everything preset, and open collaboration, which is you actually right now, Richard, nicely describing that, or Uri Engstrom describing that, when the goals emerging in activity itself, what Aristotle called praxis. Like collaboration is poesis and collaboration is praxis, but even praxis collaboration, it's not something that I think education is about. Tomorrow, let me, while other people jumping that, let me reply a little bit tomorrow, because you asking about other participants, and there was tension there as well. I'm talking about site. We had interesting Barrios Unidas, and we had different people there who were working with us. And some people heavily objected what we were doing. There was one youth, like a person who is responsible working with youth, because you know the center has multiple functions, working with adults and kids and in different capacities. So there was one person who working there who thought that the whole thing should be focused on helping kids to do their homework, basically.
Yeah.
And we had struck, by the way, the concern is very understandable. And my approach to that was very much open. I said, sure, we will do that if kids ask us. But the kids very rarely, if at all, I don't remember, just, I remember in some other sites the kids can ask for help, but I don't remember at Barrios Unidas they ask, but maybe I misremember, but it's very rarely happened. But so I was like saying, okay, if kids want it, that's fine. But she really wanted us to force that on the kids. And we resisted. And fortunately for us, there was another person who has a little bit more power than her, who kind of overruled and then removed her completely out from liaison with us, and took the position of working very, very close to with me. I really appreciate his help, support, and we work very, although there was some tensions there as well, but it was kind of I don't know, not very antagonistic. Although I don't know what happened with if we continue working with the other person as well, because I had experience of working in Delaware with a person who very much antagonized to the whole program, but we ended up for very bizarre reason working very well. She later told me that how much she spent time of closing the program. And later appreciated, still, she said, I still hate you, but I appreciate what you're doing. If you're interested, we can continue that. And it's very interesting why she appreciated it. It was so interesting.
Why?
Why? Because it helped her to control the kids. Oh. Because she said that it was the best, our program was the best enforcer of her discipline, because that was one thing that kids were really afraid, because they really want to be in the program, and so the threat of them to remove them from the program was really important threat. So she realized that we're kind of useful in her universe that she tried to build. And again, she did a very interesting things, and she later told that she kind of was influenced by the program in a very bizarre way. Like, for example, I don't remember if you know that, but beginning 2000s, there was a Pokemon mania among the kids. And it was, I found that I have a Pokemon disability because kids taught me so many times how to play this game. I still cannot play that. So I decided that I have to all of my other deficits, this is one more deficit, which I really tried to. But that person, she was youth director. She, influenced by our program, she learned how to play Pokemon. And she again incorporated, she was the best Pokemon player at the center. And she incorporated her her skills of playing Pokemon again in her this discipline regime. So he manipulated kids by kind of giving them Pokemon cards or teaching them a little bit of tricks that they didn't know. And by doing that, but she said that this idea of learning Pokemon in order to control kids, she picked up it from our program. Which is very unusual outcome. Talking about goals, who would know that our program will help to create these disciplining strategies?
That's really funny. Eugene, if I can follow up on the university community kind of the critical dialogue in terms of partnership, do you think, and I'm trying to relate this to the goals, and it's very clear to me how you know, in the after school program that, and even in teaching the class, that a lot of times the goals can be transforming and developing along the way, and in practice, and in dialogue or in collaboration. But thinking about having a university community partnership, you know, where do you see the goals playing in there? Because in my thinking about it, you know, just using UC Links as an example, usually the partnership comes together with at least a goal of developing and sustaining this program. So I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, in partnership, I think this notion of goal and activity become much more appropriate in my view. So, but I'm not rejecting the notion of activity. I'm just talking about in the context of education. So in working with communities and universities, I think there are other notions than dialogue may be more appropriate. Like, for example, we critique that with this person whom I just started describing at the Latin American Community Center in Wilmington, we developed not so much dialogic relationship, but symbiotic relations. And she's definitely very much, we start appreciating each other. And I can tell you a lot how much I appreciated of her. I invited her to talk with my students. I really tried to, because for me, even in education, she was very helpful because she definitely was a very strong proponent of one particular educational model. But besides that, just purely organizational, I really enjoy, I would say, working with her despite all these things that we were, because her heart was in the right place, in my view, overall, despite many disagreements about philosophy, values, even goals. And the same thing she told us about us, that she thought that although we're completely wrong, as she said, but your heart is there, and what you're doing, strangely enough, kind of helped her. And so we have the symbiotic relations, we move together. Important things were, in this case, it's very, this idea of the activity system, I think very helpful to think about. We very quickly tried, especially at Santa Cruz, but also I moved that to the to University of Delaware, to try not to have hierarchical relations with. It doesn't mean completely they were equal, but it's kind of, to some degree, good borders creates good neighbors, part of that. So very clear denomination of the, like, where is the, our power ends, their power begins, and so on and so forth, and respecting them, and creating this joint space where we feel more or less equal, but there are some other spheres when we were not equal, and in what ways, and how, and when there is a conflict, how to negotiate. First of all, to expect that we'll be constantly getting on each other turfs, so to speak, and how to resolve that. And we talked about that in each center. We try. I personally don't like comparing things with family or something like that, because I think it's enmeshing that, or with friendship. Although friendship emerged there, and this more organic relations definitely emerging there, but that was not the guiding model, at least for me, because I'm afraid this idea of the friendship and nurturing or whatever with organizations. Organization is very mechanical things, and it's very important to respect that their mechanisms and treat them. On the other hand, people are people, and it's also not good to treat people as robots of this or workers only of these mechanisms. So it requires this kind of art of navigating, shifting, or what in paper we talk, Cindy and I were talking about pluralisms, which is completely not trying to create unity of the things. It's very diverse. It's incompatible things that come together, and you need to juggle them. And they flank in the air. Sometimes they hit you very strongly in your head, and that's part of the whole things. And expect that at some point it will dissipate, just because there is a bigger context, bigger forces that going on that push things apart. Everything that has beginning will have end. Speaking philosophically about that.
Mm-hmm. I like to think about these complexities in the terms of different chronotopes that go parallel. For people who know Bakhtin, it's a unity of time, space, and even a axiological. But we very often involved in many of them at the same time, and some of them are contradictory, even with the same partners, even within the same practice. And I think education and schooling or post-schooling or after-schooling are these kinds of activities where different chronotypes have their life at the same time, and they impinge on each other. And navigating like how can you do this and at the same time do something else in a different way is because probably you're in two or more chronotypes at the same time.
I don't know about how chronotypes, but and probably it's a very good model to some degree, but it doesn't feel like that good, because sometimes it could be very militaristic.
Yeah.
All the relationship can work. If you want, I can give specific example, not at Santa Cruz necessarily, but in Delaware. I came there, and with some of my colleagues, we decided to start this program, and I got support from the dean back then. But nothing was happening. I had agreement with the center, Latin American Community Center, but we needed money, and money was not coming from the dean. And there was already, I remember it was August, and we were starting at September 1st or around September. The class was scheduled. It's supposed to have practicum, but we didn't have buses, and the students not allowed, these junior students, not junior, freshmen and even sophomore were not allowed in the University of Delaware to have cars on the campus. And so there is no way to bring them to the center, and there is no buses, we needed to have some person who will help at the center, and but there was no money. And I was coming to the dean, and so at the beginning of August, I was supposed to go back to visit my parents in California, and I contacted just day before leaving. I contacted to the director of LACC and told her, I'm sorry, but I don't think it will happen this year, just because, listen, it's beginning of August. There are no resources there. The dean is promising, but not doing anything, and actually having this double talk constantly. And then she asked me, Eugene, do you want me to apply nuclear option? And I said, what are you talking about? By the way, just to provide context, this is my first year at University of Delaware. I'm assistant professor, tenure track. Okay? And she said, well, she said, I bet not to tell you what I'm talking about, but it will hurt you very badly. If you say no, we will just not do anything in this year. But if you say yes, I'll do it. With high probability, the program will happen, but it will hit you. You will be a casualty of that. And I said, wow, this is very interesting proposition. I thought maybe it was stupid or adventurous or irresponsible. I said, yes, go ahead. So I arrived to California. In a few days, I'm receiving email. Unfortunately, my computer, I have crashed on my hard drive in a few years after that, and that emails disappeared because I wish I could preserve them for history, because it says, beginning, the email was coming from my dean, and beginning, just not hello, not anything. Who do you think, who the hell do you think you are? This is beginning of By the way, from email, I couldn't understand whatsoever he was talking about. But it's except one thing, he's super angry at me, and but I don't know why. So, by the way, the ending of this email was very positive. Send me your budget. By the way, the budget was for $60,000. And I sent him before, it's not like that, but he wanted to send me again the budget request. So I immediately, of course, called to the director of LACC. I said, what's happened? I know that now I'm in trouble, but I don't know why and what's going on. And there is some positive things coming from that as well. And she said to me, well, maybe you will not get your tenure. This is how she told me. I said, what's happened? I said, well, I called the state senator, who is really my ally. And state senator called the dean and said, tell me what the university is doing for the local community. Since he cannot tell anything, the senator said, explain me why I should vote for University of Delaware budget. Why I should support it and not to cut that and not calling for cutting it. And since Dean couldn't explain anything, he said, okay, let's have a meeting tomorrow at such and such time at Latin American Community Center where you come with the explanation, with the plan, how you're going to support local community at the university. Why is it called University of Delaware? Why is it state university? So you can imagine what happened. But we got this $60,000 and the program started. But I'm just saying that sometimes it's very militaristic relations. And so I don't know how the notion of chronotop can capture that. And sometimes not at all. It's, this is maybe extreme, but I just want to bring that extreme to show that it happened.
Gene, I would like to follow up on that. I really appreciated your exploration of the concept of critical dialoguing, and it clearly in your article provided for a very rich ethnographic account of what was going on at your site. A while ago, you said, well, critical dialoguing really doesn't happen at a higher level with universities and communities working together. And I would like to explore that a little bit further and see if perhaps critical dialoguing is really what's happening at all of these different levels. I felt like one of the very minor critiques I had with your paper was that, again, you had this very rich ethnographic account of critical dialoguing within the site. But when you talked about UC Links statewide in general, you made some, I felt, rather superficial statements about UC Links, which kind of represented as static conditions, things that were really dynamic historical processes going on. You mentioned, for instance, that UC Links expected the sites to report and do student assessments based on standardized testing. In fact, that wasn't UC Links imposing those guidelines. It was the UC Office of the President imposing on UC Links, and it was actually state mandated. It was mandated by the state legislature at that time. It was a time of No Child Left Behind, and we fought for 2 or 3 years to overcome that, and we were successful in UC Links in overcoming that kind of standardized testing approach to assessment, and we're able to develop a process that was that reflected more adequately what sites were doing, and that alternative approach came from the various faculty leaders, the PIs for the various UC Links projects. And so it's a very clear example of critical dialogue. It was a knockdown, drag out fight for 2 or 3 years. And it was not a friendly, consensual process. It was a very contested and contentious kind of dialoguing that was occurring at many different levels. And so I would like to argue actually for the utility of your concept of critical dialoguing, not simply at the site level, but at multiple levels organizational activity.
I think, Charles, and again, of course, I think that's, we definitely didn't know, and I didn't know a lot of things going on behind the scenes. That's one thing. And I think different people had different attitudes toward that, even back then and even now. There are some people, especially in psychology, it's not necessarily they want standardized tests, but they want psychological tests, which is, it's not the question how much they standard or not standard. And they really believed in that. And I think they believe, some of them keep believing even now. That one thing. Another thing, that on the bigger scale, I'm not sure the notion of critical dialoguing is useful at that, because it's not, like, I didn't critical dialogue with my dean, because that's not what was happening. Although I tried necessarily explain him, but I don't think he was much interested in that. And so that's why I would not call relationship with my dean is kind of more shaped by critical dialogue. And it's not necessarily needed to be, as again, working at, because we're doing something. This is more in the realm of activity rather than in the realm of deconstructing things. We actually I'm very much trying to construct the program rather than deconstruct the program. It's mostly, and I don't think Edina also wants to deconstruct something. He wants to actually, well, in my view, he tried to be kind of on bureaucratic side and not to spend money. He tried to save money and not to spend on some kind of frivolous activities from his point of view. And there is no much dialogue was happening. There is some dialogue happened with this person at the center, what I described, but most of that, our relationship was not guided by dialogue, but mostly guided by symbiotic relations, which is not dialogic in nature necessarily. So I would not overuse the notion of critical dialogue. Critical dialogue is, again, as Anna said, it's about deconstructing things. It's not about working together. It's not about achieving something. It's about trying to figure out, like, what's going on. Well, is it good or is it not good? What the hell? And is it better for whom, for what? And so on and so forth. Just engaging in this kind of things. It's not about moving forward or trying to secure something. In my view, this is more realm of activity, which is, I think, that's Vygotskins and activity theories is very, very appropriate to apply, but not necessarily dialogue. And dialogue can happen in these conditions as well, not question about that, including critical dialogue. But it's subordinated, it's temporary, it's not, when it's becoming too strong, there is a lot of forces to kill it, because in a very appropriate way. It's not, I'm not saying that it's bad necessarily, because people need to achieve something. They cannot continue discussing things and discussing things and nothing happening. So my kind of response to you, Charles, that I would not use too much critical dialogue that's happening when you have a fight with a state and so on and so forth. Although part of that maybe involves some elements of that, but it was not your goal to engage in critical dialogue, what they think, what you think, and so on and so forth. You needed concrete results. And in this case, you even knew more or less in advance what concrete results were. You were open to compromise maybe to a certain degree, but nevertheless, you knew what concrete results are, which is not, in my view, a critical dialogic conditions where we were talking about.
Well, I think that's worth exploring further. But because I think what happens in organizations, yeah, I agree that activity theory is a very useful paradigm for understanding what's going on. But I think we need to maybe clarify exactly what we mean by critical dialoguing, because it seems to me that a lot of the back and forth and the argumentation that happened at multiple levels in that process of defining, we didn't want any kind of assessment. strategy imposed on us, but we didn't have a choice in that. Our funders demanded it. And so we had to negotiate, we had to work out what that was going to be. And I think you could argue that a form of digital dialoguing was taking place by which we were able to finally convince the powers that be that their original strategy was not a good one.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm arguing for your concept, but which I think is a very valuable one, and I think because it does bring into the fact that these are the work that we do in multiple levels is not even when people kind of look back on it and say, oh, that was a very collaborative process. In fact, it was very contentious and very, very conflictual.
And collaboration involves contention. It's not this harmony, but it's sharedness. It's focusing on the sharedness, which is critical dialogue doesn't search for that. And that's why critical dialogue is non-productive. It can be byproductive, but it's definitely not productive. It doesn't focus on any product. And it doesn't see not having a product when there is no even byproductive things, that it's bad. Not necessarily. And so I saw the, is it message from Carl? I'm trying to monitor. Oh yeah, I think it's Carla, because I saw very quickly appearing, yes, please clarify. So, so what is critical dialogue? That's a good question. I think it's coming from a very particular vision of dialogue. It's not any dialogue is critical, and not everything is dialogue. But another thing, it's not every dialogue is critical. So I'm sorry, it's just like, yeah, I cannot right now, please bit later. Okay, and
okay, Eugene,
please,
there is the interference of when you are moving, the sound registers you're moving, so kind of a little interference. Yeah.
Just a sec. Can you interrupt? Just
yeah.
Something.
Okay. It's I think we should insist on clarifying the critical dialogue and delineating, because it's very important when he comes back.
Yeah, and I also wonder what's the incentive. I mean, why does somebody have the social agency to want to engage in critical dialogue when there may or may not be any payoff? Or well, what's the incentive? What's the motivation to want to engage in critical dialogue?
That's a very important question, I think. The way I understand it is just like, first of all, I'm going to the original word, meaning of the word dialogue, which doesn't mean interchange. Dia doesn't mean two, but means through, thinking through, and dialogue means thinking through together. And so when people have something to understand and think through logically together, taking different alternatives into like possible different explanations, possible different considerations, possible different implications, just kind of like going through the issues that without any wish to conclude something at that point of view, but to take everything into account and all the different potentially contradictory explanations into account. So you don't know where you're going to end, whether you will end. And you agree that the issue can be always reopened, because you don't know whether you completely exhausted. Is it exhaustible at all? And in that sense, whatever is the product as a byproduct, not because you're going toward that. We're just, Eugene, talking about starting to clarify what is critical dialogue. And Richard says, what would be the motivation for people to go into critical dialogue if there is no product?
Yeah, and this is very interesting, the idea that it's needed motivation and not happening all the time just because it's very human existential need to do that. Um, uh, critical dialogue, it's about critical examination. I'm building on a kind of Plato / Socrates idea that, you know, in his apology just before being killed at the trial, Socrates said something like that the unexamined life is not worth living. So critical dialogue, exactly, it's about examination of life, self, society, world, and education itself. And that statement, by the way, about that unexamined life is not worth living. It's everything about, it's about deconstructing everything. And how it deconstructs, it's put in contact, first of all, alternative voices, alternative ideas, worldviews, and trying to develop, testing them, which is better for what, for whom. Everything becomes in the air. And we don't need to come to the kind of this definitive conclusion. Sometimes it might happen, sometimes not. Usually when even they come to that, later on, they realize that it's, or they or somebody else realize that it's very temporary and it can be changed. As Bakhtin said, this kind of dialogue doesn't have a bottom. It's bottomless. It's unfinalizable. It's not only unfinalized, meaning it's interrupted, as Anna said, but it's unfinalizable in a way Bakhtin talks about the big dialogue. So people die and things continue or drop or reappeared again. But it's dialogue itself doesn't have ending. It's as Anna said, it's very different chronotype in itself of the dialogue. It doesn't have urgency. You can return back to it. Unlike in many things in life, which has urgency, we have life. You see, I was interrupted by something. I cannot postpone that. I have to stop and did something and return back. But dialogue doesn't know that. It doesn't care about that type of dialogue, what we're talking about.
And Bakhtin also talks about double dialogicality, that
Yeah.
in any specific event, there's always a larger meaning to that specific event. So there are always bigger implications that need to be explored through double dialogicality.
I found, Rich, thanks, that's very helpful. And I found one of the problem, like with Bakhtin, that he using notion of dialogue in so many different senses. And so that's why it's so sometimes confusing what he's saying, because in one place he said the dialogue is good, in another can be bad, like external dialogicity, or external dialogism, better to say. And so on and so forth. So, or in monologue, in some places good, in some places bad, in some places complementary. It's so interesting how he's using that. Yeah, but in this particular case, that critical dialogue, it's very deconstructive in nature. That's why it's not very useful for building enterprises. Although it has sometimes, and people sometimes bring that, but it's usually, I would call domesticated, in domesticated sense. We want it a little bit for a short time and then dropped it because it becomes unproductive. Exactly. And they're right about that. That's unproductive, it's true. And not helpful even, because we're not moving forward. The dialogue is not about moving forward. There is no we don't know where we're moving, or should we move even. So, and I thought my attraction to that, I thought it's much better to describe the situation in education rather than activity, where we need to move to something, we need to have product, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of what I see that.
So
it's
that's
almost
why
like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's why you used it in the undergraduate classroom, more than in the after school program in the interactions between the undergraduates and the kids, because there was, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because, no, you go ahead.
No, actually, that's not, this is, in my view, this is what's interesting because, let's say Soil, I think his understanding that he start seeing that as a modeling him how to be with the kids because he became attractive to that. And that's actually interesting question. Let me give an interesting example of that. That was in Delaware. And in Delaware, we discussed different models of education, actually different multicultural models of education, which is a little bit different, although not completely. And there were students who, the question was, how, what they like as a students versus they were like as a teachers. And we had situation when students who said that they like this kind of critical dialogue as a students, but they hated for as a teachers. And so the other students actually start calling them that this is hypocrisy. So what you like as a student, you deny that to your students. So there was interesting discussion about that. Also, I remember it was very heated discussion in that particular class. So I think it is, in a way, a model of teacher-student relations. It doesn't matter it's between undergraduate students or even graduate students or elementary school kids or whatever. So it was kind of involved in that as well.
So you earlier talked about the limitations drawn on Rogoff's works about the ethnicity perspectives on all this, and certainly her research with families in Latin America, I think, identified a very different model of socialization within families, given the cultural differences in that. So could you expand more on your notion that you said, you were framing the issue in terms of an ethnicity perspective on collaboration and learning?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a tension between, especially in Barbara's work, how I understand that, and maybe I don't understand that well, but at least when I was there, because she may be moved away from that, I don't know about that. Although I'm not sure that it's true, looking at her recent work that I look at that. She really studies, she's trying to kind of rehabilitate collaboration. She's trying to rehabilitate certain patterns of interaction and working together in traditional cultures, specifically in Mexico and Guatemala and some other places, which is, I think it's a very noble task, but it's kind of replacement one ethnocentrism with another one. And again, I talk with Barbara about that, and she knows about that, but I don't know, my feeling that she doesn't know what to do with that. It's the fact that it's you promoting one way, at the same time you know perfectly well that it is not a good idea to do. At the same time, it is a good idea to do. Let me tell you that I think the same problem exists for me now in education and for Anna as well, that sharing this problem. And the problem is in education. Let me shift from Barbara because it's better to talk with Barbara about that, and she's not here. But because this problem is still, in certain ways, education is activity, and it pushing forward this activity problems on us. So let me give my dilemma. You know, on one hand, I said, well, it's not a good idea to have purpose of education or even define education, what it's about. On another hand, I'm defining that. I don't know if you hear that. I'm kind of hypocrite right here because I said, well, good education is when it involves critical dialoguing or critical examination, blah, blah, blah. I can define that. What's good education for me? At the same time, I said, well, if you, Mara, or somebody else, Bank G, doing something else on Natalia, that's fine as well. How can that be together? Because deeply down, I know, like if Soil doing adult-run approach, I know that he's wrong. But at the same time, I said, oh, it's okay for him to do that. So how these two things come together? So Anne and I, we came to this idea of, we're struggling with that as well now. So sorry if it will be not that clear, but we're trying. So with the idea of dualism, first of all. So what is dualism there? The dualism is between a visionary view, what you think is good, at the same time pluralistic view. Like, for example, let me give in the dualism with example of some other area, not education, but some other, like freedom of speech. Remember that famous words that usually attributed to Voltaire, but some historians said that he never said that I disagree with you, but I'm willing to give my life for your freedom to express your opinion, with which I disagree. In my view, this is a great dualistic view, because on one hand, in freedom of speech, you're not saying that what other people say is you agree with that, it's worth as what you say. No, you know that they're wrong and you're right, you know about that. But at the same time, you're willing to not only tolerate, but even support their freedom to express whatever they want to express, with which you completely disagree. Because if you agree with that, you don't need to actually to support that, because you will be supported anyway, because you agree with that. But exactly the paradox, you're supporting something with what you disagree. So in my view, this is an interesting approach to preserve that visionary and kind of pluralistic vision of the world, and as well as visionary at the same time, in dualistic way. What does it mean dualistic? It's more like any dualism. It's will be strong in one way, and different things will be emphasized in another time, and they incompatible with each other. That's called dualism. If they were compatible, if you can unite them, it stopped being dualism, it become monism. But it's really a dualistic view. And I think that dualistic view is, at least in education, it's extremely helpful. So it means that, yes, I think I have my own vision of education, and I like that, and I can argue for that, and so on and so forth. At the same time, I appreciate other ideas about education, despite I will criticize them, but I still appreciate, and I think they are important. By the way, it's that in a way my visionary approach supports that, because it is, if it's about critical dialogue, it's about exploration of differences, the difference needs to exist. They have to be legitimate somehow. You know, in order for you to test this idea should be living. So otherwise, there was no, this alternative will not exist. That's why I actually very much like to work with people who have very different ideas of education, and welcome that.
But also it's within, even on a very micro level, even working with little children, appreciating that what they are thinking and feeling and expressing, and you think you know better, but appreciating that for them, this is the reality, and exploring that reality together with them. It creates a dialogue. So this difference is not saying, okay, they're just ignorant. Yeah. And see things, but taking it as seriously as possible, that it's not ignorance, but it's their life. Mm-hmm. And so then arguing with them, not to teach them what is the right way, but to explore. Critical dialogue would become then exploration of their idea, in a way that gives legitimacy to that idea, no matter how much you disagree with it.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, kind of when I teach and I'm with my students, what I think I knowledge, it will partially collapse for me. Like when I'm with the kids who not so-called know what 2 + 2 = 4 is, my knowledge of 2 + 2 collapse with them, or should collapse, because if it's too strong, we cannot have dialogue, because I know and they don't. Dialogue cannot happen between people who know and don't know. It happens between people who are trying to figure out what's the hell going on. In this case, you have to be open. You should not assume that it's 4, and you're willing to go in the directions that maybe suddenly become open and unknown about that.
Yes, and that's in that sense, dialogue becomes like, what if something else was true? So it's a suspension of belief.
Then how do you create a space where that openness is valued?
That's a very good
You don't,
question.
because you cannot, and this is an interesting paradox. You don't, and you don't assume that it is valued, and you don't assume that this is actually they need it. Like for example,
yes. Okay, somebody was just,
Elaine?
it was a mistake. Elaine probably was not telling us something, but didn't mute
okay,
her. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, something good. So that's Rich, this is a terrific question. And I think this diversity of approaches education, I position myself when I'm with my students, for example, that my goal is to help them. So by the way, you can see that with Soil, I'm trying to help him to test kids. You know, I knew that from my point of view, it's a very bad idea to test them. And I might be wrong about that, but that's my position, my visionary position. But as a teacher, I was trying to help him to test, because several things. He wanted me to impose testing on all the kids and all the other students. And that I cannot, because this is, in my view, abuse of my power. Not because I even disagree with him, but it is abusing exactly from my, if my goal is to help him, but my goal is to help other students as well, and kids as well. So I will be in submitting to his will, I will violate that. So I cannot do that. So within that context, I try to help him. So the idea came with this idea of the very playful testing. By the way, he thought that he was testing kids. The kids were thinking that they're playing game. Okay? And this is an interesting game, very challenging and fun game. Okay? But he was thinking that, I found a new way under that conditions that allows him to pre-test the kids and later post-test the kids. So in this particular case, it's happened that at some point, for some miraculous reasons, the soil become appreciating that. Rich, but it might not happen that way. It's never guaranteed that it's happened.
Well, the other issue here is you're all assuming that we're a bunch of individuals who voice our desires, needs, goals, etc. When a languaging perspective says, no, it's the language itself that's the medium that's shaping this all. So we adopt or we take on or call out the language itself, like the notion of testing as a word. And it's that languaging or language itself as medium that's defining these relations. So it moves away from an individualistic perspective that we're all kind of negotiating these critical dialogues as individuals, to think about languaging as itself a powerful medium that's shaping these relational ways of being.
And let me give example of that, Rich. I agree with you. And part of that, and this is, I'm invoking especially Natalia and Anna. The reason it's working because both of them speaking Slavic languages. The power of English is terrible because it creates this idea of polarization between individual and social. And there is nothing, you cannot get out of this prison of these two extremes. Slavic languages, and I don't know some other languages, please feel free, other colleagues, to join that and share if you're multilingual about that. In Russian, and I think in Serbian as well, and Ukrainian, there is such a word as личность, which is neither individual nor social. And it's not in between either. It's very different. Individual is atomistic, and it's easy to criticize that and blah, 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 blah. Social become collectivistic too much, and it's kind of drain any agency from people because it's language doing that. And so in this case, it's very difficult to impose me this Slavic term, but I really want to be more faithful to this Slavic term личность. I don't know how much it exists in Spanish or Korean or Chinese or Japanese or some other language.
The closest English term is person.
Yeah.
Person, which is not individual. Person has many more characteristics than some atomistic, alone, non-compatible. It's really, now if we would start to discuss what's a person, something that that is recognized by others, first of all, as a person who has a character, who has their own ways, who has their own personal history that nobody else knows, etc., etc. But at the same time, is not apart from the society.
And I see the purpose of education, again, this is my vision review, the purpose of education exactly to liberate of this colonization by culture, language, and whatever. It doesn't mean this liberation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you reject that. Liberation is not about rejection. It's about figure out like whether or not it's you who's saying that, or is it your language saying for you, or culture saying from you, or your upbringing saying from you, or your social class saying from you, or your gender saying from you, and so on and so forth. You, by the way, may agree with that. And that's nothing wrong. In this case, you stop being colonized. You say, I agree what my culture is saying from me. Or I agree what language is saying from me. That's fine. In my view, you're fully liberated when you're doing that. But part of liberation exactly to decolonization of the language, culture, society, collectivity, family, and so on and so on and so forth.
So it's education in that sense leads to a transcendence of all these knowing about what could control you. It makes you freer to be able to make choices. Whether you want to be controlled or not, is there any other way?
It's not about whether or not you want to be controlled or not. It's not about that. You stop being controlled when you consciously accept that. And of course, there are only limits how much you can do that. But that's part of limit of any education. On the positive side, all of this language, culture, and so on and so forth provides material for education, material for your transcendence. If you don't have what to transcend, you cannot transcend that. So in a way, it creates this material for your creativity. And it's in this case, it should be very much cherished. And don't look at that as necessarily colonization, but it's material for your work. And something that you should be excited about your heritage, about your culture, your language, and so forth. So it's both. It's creative material and the prison at the same time. And part of this education is working out of all this thing, especially this colonization part.
Okay.
But what Rich is talking about.
Want to just take a little moment to say it's 10 minutes to 2 o'clock. Many people will maybe have something else planned. So I would like to open for anyone else who would like to add something, a question or impression or a comment, if you have to, or would like to do something, like Natalia or Bonki or Carla and Elaine. of us who, besides us, who talked all the time. If you want to, if not, nothing, we can continue or close, whatever you like.
Well, if I can add to this whole conversation, I was right now working in collaboration with a pre-university program where it partnered with the international student destined university, and they have a very rigid structure. In the first year, they were expected to learn academic English, general academic English. And then in the second year, they were expected to learn content of what they are hoping to major in. So in that structure, the curriculum is very much shaped in very much in a regimented way. And the way that the instructions or curriculums are designed has to be partnered with what the university is told to them to do design. So I was thinking, this is a very interesting way of, I'm not the person who is gonna change the whole system, but it just hearing from you guys what is critical dialogue, and it's not the end product, it's a byproduct. It kind of makes me to think about, there might be some possibility that there might be some wiggle rooms to engage and explore. And it was just very inspirational moment for me to think about alternative possibilities. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank Bonji. Let me a little bit comment on what you said. In my experience, I taught in different countries. The most kind of interesting dialogic experience I had in China. I taught 2 classes in China in different cities. And by the way, I was told before going to China that there will be no dialogue whatsoever there and no critical dialogue, because students want lectures to take notes and to pass exams. After visiting China, I came to the conclusion that this is what professors want, not what students want. It's reattributing students what the system designed for them. But in my view, when you start losing that in your class, in the small space of your class, students are so hungry for that, and they're so excited to do that. And so you don't need to do sometimes on the big scale. On the other hand, it's a good question, what's the limitations? It's almost like a question, how to create freedom in prison. The best way to do it is to open the prison, and that's the best way to do that. But and there is a good question, how much you can do it, especially when the prison is very strict prison, and that's how much you can do on the small. But I think I encourage to try, but there are a lot of issues, including issue of your safety doing that, which is very important.
Thank you very much. And I also agree that it's, and I like your ethnographic accounts, because it vividly illustrates how you and teachers and the students negotiate and creates dialogue. And I think that's more in some ways manageable scale than going into different institutional levels. And by documenting the whole procedures, it provides a possibility of persuasion, of thinking alternative discourse and different ways to engage.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bonji. Or Bonji.
I just like the way in this space you walk the talk, right? It's always you didn't come out with that, here's 5 things that we need to know about critical pedagogy. You said, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So you're walking the talk and being dialogic, and I appreciate that.
Thanks, Rich. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I thought I'm just inarticulate.
But it seems like this discussion is an example of critical dialogue in action, right?
Mm.
I hope so.
Yes. We hope so, yes. All right. Well, at that note, if anybody else, nobody else wants to say anything else.
Can I say something?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm opening the floor. Please do.
Okay, so my question is this: are we supposed to be helping the youth move from collaboration to critical dialogue as well, or is this just intended for the adults?
Well, I'm trying to do that with youth as well, and I think youth is very much interested in that as well. Which is, again, what does it mean to move in that direction? It's everything is open. It's just if they want to do this way, okay, I'm supporting that way. If they want to do that way, I'm supporting that way as well. And that's, but at the same time, I'm just raising questions when I see the question. And if people want to engage in exploring them, that's great. If they don't need me, that's fine as well. I actually think that teacher begins when students ask for help. If they're not asking for help, I'm not their teacher. I'm kind of nominal teacher, but not real teacher. So in this case, my goal is to become helpful for them. And they might sometimes they want critical dialogue, sometimes they don't want critical dialogue. And in my view, that's fine. Although my bias, of course, for the critical dialogue.
Okay, no, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I was asking because I've been working with the UC Links community for the last, I'm going to say 3 years, with the work that I do with the foundation, and I have my own program. So our program meets Sundays from 1 to 3 p.m. The way that I teach the class is that we talk about everything under the sun. Nothing is off limits. And their parents are there. So we have conversations that range from, I mean, sometimes we talk about the Native Americans of, Mesoamerica, and we go into detail about that. Sometimes we talk about what it means that your hormones and your neurotransmitters are off. But what I've seen is that the kids are grateful to be included, and also that their voices aren't shut down. So I'm there to guide them to find the answers, but I'm making sure that they're doing it themselves. Like, I'm not the one that's talking, because I took a class at UCSD this last quarter, and one of the things that I learned was that the person that's doing the talking, right, is the person that's learning. And so I love this idea of having dialogue and including the youth, because I really think that talking through things sometimes allows you to gain that deeper knowledge. So that's why I was wondering. And I mean, thank you for everything everybody has had to say, and thank you for this great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Yeah, if we had time, I would share. It's a very interesting experience how this critical dialogue like spontaneously emerged at the LACC out of actually a kid asking me to help to do homework. To help, I would say like this, to help to do homework, which means to do it as quick as possible. But it turned to be a very exciting event, which is
I think you're thinking of the event that we described in the article on creative teaching as art, as creative art.
I'm talking about, I'm not sure, I don't remember that, but I'm talking about this. This is about high school student who needs to write a report about global warming. And
that's different.
That's very different. And okay, to be brief, it's very interesting case. So he asked me to help him, and ask him like what it involved. He needs to read some article in newspaper and make report. And report means this template, like what happened, who said this, and it's about global warming. So Actually, no, it's not about global warming. It should be about any scientific things. I'm sorry. It should be any scientific kind of things. It's not about global warming. It's he, and he told me he selected article, and that article about melting ice in Antarctica, it's about global warming. He selected that. And asked him, like, how did you select this article? And he said, because it was very short, so it's very quickly to read it. And so I asked him, so you want to do this homework as fast as possible. Why? And he said, because I want to play video games here at the center, right there. We were sitting in the computer room, by the way. And I said, okay. And then I thought, and this is completely improvisation because very responsible, by the way, looking back on that. I said, what if we will find something like longer article, but it will be interesting to read and discuss it. And he said, so it will be as interesting as playing video games? I said, well, maybe. He said, well, I don't care. In this case, why not to have long article? And then I was just thinking how to find good article for him. So I knew about him a little bit. I know that at that time at the center, the biggest issue was to find about how to pirate music on internet. Back then, it was a big issue. There was no Spotify. There was some others. It was not that easy. And I look at the search and I found immediately, I put in Google, maybe it was before even Google existed. Anyway, in the search, I put music pirating. And first article that came, thanks God, was very good article. It was from New York Times about a woman, a retired teacher, who was accused of music pirating. She has two sons. One son was computer programmer and another was lawyer. And computer programmer showed that it's impossible. There is no pirating software exists because she was using old Apple computer, Apple II, and there is no software for that. And lawyer can argue that in the courts. And the article was very complex. It was discussing dynamic IP address and so on and so forth. So we started reading together. He had difficulty to read. So we were reading together this article. Other kids dropped everything they were playing and joined us. And what it was a discussion. We had this discussion about everything. The article mentioned that the teacher was dyslexic. So we discussed what dyslexia about, that I'm dyslexic. Then about music pirating, like why is it good, what's bad? There's ethical issues about that. And the kids make such a wonderful suggestion. They, for example, just give one example. They was arguing for pirating and I was arguing against pirating. So they asked me, Eugene, what are you doing here at the center? And I said, because it was not during the time with my students. I said, I'm coming because I want to know how you learn in an informal environment. I'm learning from that. And they said, who is paying for that? What will happen out of that? I said, articles. Will you sell your articles? I said, no. How you paid for the whole thing you're doing? I think university pays. I said, well, maybe musicians should be paid by the university and the music should be free. So I just think one idea that it was such a deep discussion that we had out of that stupid homework. By the way, he made this homework. He did write that. To his teacher credit, it was such a quality. For the first time, she received A for that. Not only that, the teacher asked him to read his homework on the intercom for the whole school. Because it was so, by the way, he forgot about all this nonsense about template. He wrote this completely, he was just reporting on our discussion that we have with many other kids who participated in that. And I was very critical. We just tried to turn any stone, like about everything, about ethics, about what's dynamic IP address. Why is it wrong for this company to blame the teacher if she's using a dynamic IP address? I mean, it was so interesting. But that's happened, and in my view, youth is very hungry for that type of critical dialoguing.
Yeah, they're on the streets right now demonstrating it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's true. That's
right.
Yeah.
Right. It is like that. Yeah. Yeah, there are many more questions that I would have, but we probably running out of time. And so I suggest that if you have any kind of afterthoughts or questions or anything like that, post them on the Facebook. We will publish this on the Facebook and on our YouTube channel, this whole conversation. And maybe some other people join in with their questions or their thoughts, and that's how we can continue dialogue. And then sometimes in the future, we can maybe meet again together to continue, depending on how the future works for us.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for your time and wonderful discussion.
Thank
This
you
is so
all.
wonderful. Thank you all.
Yes, thank
Bye.
you all. Bye-bye.